Do you believe that your soul could exist in another universe right now? What if we told you that there are 10 documented cases of people who've encountered their own alternate selves, living completely different lives in parallel dimensions? If you're thinking this sounds like pure science fiction and that there must be a logical explanation for everything, then we're really curious to hear how you'll explain these 10 mysterious cases. These aren't just strange dreams or hallucinations. These are real people who've experienced something that science can't explain, something that suggests our souls might be living multiple lives across infinite realities. So, let's jump straight into the first one, and this one is on a whole different level. In 2012, a Japanese businesswoman named Akiko Tanaka was riding the evening train home through Tokyo when something happened that would change her understanding of reality forever. She was sitting quietly, scrolling through her phone, when she looked up and saw herself sitting directly across from her. Not someone who looked similar, not a twin she never knew about, but herself, wearing different clothes, with a different hairstyle, staring back with the exact same expression of shock and disbelief. The incident lasted only seconds before the train stopped and the other Akiko rushed off, disappearing into the crowded station. But those few moments were enough to shatter everything Akiko thought she knew about the universe. Akiko had been taking the Yamanote line home from her office in Shibuya, the same route she'd traveled 5 days a week for 7 years. It was March 14th, just after 7 p.m., and the train was moderately crowded with the usual evening commuters. She later told investigators that she remembered the moment perfectly because she'd just received a text message from her sister when something made her look up. Call it instinct, call it fate, but in that instant, her eyes locked with those of a woman sitting in the seat directly opposite her. The woman was her. Same face, same bone structure, same small scar above the left eyebrow from a childhood bicycle accident. But this other Akiko was dressed in a nurse's uniform, something the real Akiko had never worn in her life. Her hair was cut shorter, styled differently, and she wore glasses, which Akiko had never needed. For approximately 15 seconds, both women stared at each other in absolute shock, neither speaking, neither moving. Imagine that moment. You're sitting on a train, and suddenly you're looking at yourself. A version of you that somehow exists in the same world at the same time. Absolutely insane. According to Akiko's testimony to both police and later to researchers at Tokyo University, the other woman's expression mirrored her own perfectly. The same wide eyes, the same slack jaw, the same look of complete disbelief. It was as if they were truly connected, experiencing the exact same impossible moment from opposite sides. But then the train lurched to a stop at Harajuku Station, and the spell broke. The other Akiko stood up quickly, her face suddenly filled with what looked like panic or fear, and rushed toward the doors. The real Akiko tried to stand, tried to follow, but the crowd pressed in as more passengers boarded. By the time she made it to the platform, the other woman had vanished completely into the sea of people. Now, here's where it gets even stranger. Akiko immediately went to the station authorities and filed a report. She described the woman in detail, insisted she wasn't losing her mind, and demanded they review the security camera footage from that train car. The Tokyo Metro Police actually did investigate. They pulled the footage from March 14th, and what they found was deeply unsettling. The cameras clearly showed Akiko sitting in her seat, looking at her phone. Then, at exactly 7:04 p.m., she looked up suddenly. Her expression changed to shock, and she stared at something across from her. But here's the problem. The seat across from her was empty. Absolutely empty. Not a single person sitting there. Some skeptics immediately dismissed the case as a hallucination, perhaps brought on by stress or exhaustion. Others suggested it was an elaborate hoax, though they couldn't explain why Akiko would fabricate such a story, or how she managed to fool the police for weeks. But there were details that didn't fit the hallucination theory. Akiko provided incredibly specific descriptions of the other woman's clothing, right down to the hospital ID badge that read, "0." When investigators checked, there was no nurse by that name at any Shinjuku hospital, but the hospital she described, it existed. Just 2 kilometers from where the train stopped. Researchers who studied the case later proposed something extraordinary. What if Akiko had experienced a genuine intersection with a parallel universe? A moment where the boundaries between realities became thin enough for two versions of the same soul to see each other? According to quantum physics, there's a theory that suggests every choice we make creates a branching universe where we made a different decision. In one universe, Akiko became a businesswoman. In another, she became a nurse. For just 15 seconds on a Tokyo train, these two realities touched. So, did Akiko Tanaka truly meet herself from another dimension? Was it a glimpse into a parallel life her soul is living simultaneously? Or is there a completely rational explanation that we just haven't discovered yet? A thought that is as fascinating as it is terrifying. And if it happened to her, could it happen to you? Pretty creepy when you think about it. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a respected psychiatrist from Boston, began experiencing something in 2016 that she initially dismissed as stress-induced hallucinations. But as the experiences continued, she realized they were far too detailed, far too consistent to be anything her mind could fabricate. She started having vivid, uncontrollable memories of a life she'd never lived. A life where she wasn't a doctor, but a marine biologist living in Australia, married to a man she'd never met in this reality, with two children whose faces she could describe in perfect detail. The memories were so powerful, so real, that she could recall conversations, smell the ocean air, and feel emotions from experiences that never happened to her in this world. Dr. Mitchell had spent 15 years building a successful psychiatric practice in Boston, specializing in trauma and memory disorders. She knew the human mind better than most. She understood how false memories could form, how the brain could mix dreams with reality, how stress could create vivid imaginative experiences. But what started happening to her in June of 2016 defied everything she'd learned in medical school. The first memory hit her while she was driving home from work. Suddenly, without warning, she wasn't in Boston anymore. She was standing on a beach in Queensland, Australia, watching two children, a boy and a girl, building sandcastles. She knew their names, Ethan and Lily. She could feel the sun on her skin, hear their laughter, smell the salt water. Then, just as suddenly, she was back in her car, trembling, with tears streaming down her face for children who didn't exist. At first, Sarah tried to rationalize it. Maybe she was overworked, maybe she needed a vacation. But the memories kept coming, and they were always the same life, the same alternate reality. She remembered her wedding day to a man named David Chen, a conservation photographer she'd never met in this world. She remembered studying marine biology at James Cook University instead of psychiatry at Harvard. She remembered her small research lab where she studied coral reef restoration, the sound of her daughter practicing piano, the feeling of her son hugging her goodbye on his first day of school. These weren't fleeting images or vague impressions. They were complete, detailed memories with emotional depth that felt absolutely real. Now, here's where it gets even stranger. Dr. Mitchell began keeping a detailed journal of these parallel memories, documenting every detail with the same clinical precision she used with her patients. She wrote down addresses, names, specific conversations, even the layout of the house she'd never actually lived in. The house was in a suburb of Cairns called Edge Hill, painted blue with white trim, with a mango tree in the backyard. She described the interior so thoroughly that she could draw floor plans. She knew which floorboard creaked in the hallway, where the water stain was on the ceiling in the kitchen, which drawer stuck in the bedroom dresser. In 2017, driven by a need to prove she wasn't losing her mind, Dr. Mitchell did something extraordinary. She booked a flight to Cairns, Australia. She'd never been to Australia in her entire life. Using the address from her memories, she took a taxi to Edge Hill and stood outside a blue house with white trim. Her hands were shaking. The mango tree was there, exactly where she remembered it. When a woman answered the door, Sarah nearly collapsed. The woman looked confused, asked if she could help. Sarah stammered out an excuse about looking for a friend, but what she really wanted to do was ask if she could see inside, to confirm if the creaky floorboard and the water stain and the sticky drawer were all exactly where her memories said they'd be. She didn't go inside. The fear was too overwhelming, but she did something else. She searched public records and found that a marine biologist had indeed lived at that address until 2015. Her name was Rebecca Morrison, and she'd worked at a coral reef research facility. Sarah found photos online from a research publication. Rebecca looked nothing like her, but standing next to Rebecca in one photo was a man who made Sarah's heart stop. David Chen, conservation photographer, exactly as she'd seen him in her memories. Absolutely insane. Neurologist Dr. Mitchell consulted were baffled. Brain scans showed normal activity. There was no evidence of dissociative disorders, no signs of schizophrenia, nothing that could explain such detailed, consistent false memories of a completely coherent alternate life. Some colleagues suggested she was experiencing a complex form of confabulation, where the brain creates false memories based on fragments of information unconsciously absorbed. But that theory couldn't explain how she knew about a house she'd never seen or a man she'd never met. So, what really happened to Dr. Sarah Mitchell? Is she somehow accessing memories from a parallel version of herself, living in another universe? Are her consciousness and her alternate self's consciousness bleeding through the boundaries between realities? Or is there a scientific explanation we simply haven't discovered yet? Think about this for a moment. What if right now, in another dimension, another version of you is living a completely different life? And what if, just for a second, you could remember it? A thought that is as fascinating as it is deeply unsettling. Pretty insane when you really consider the implications. Michael Chen, a freelance photographer from San Francisco, was shooting a documentary project about cemeteries in 2018 when he reviewed his photos and discovered something that made his blood run cold. In the background of one image, barely visible behind a group of mourners, he saw himself. Not just someone who resembled him, but himself exactly as he looked that day, wearing the same jacket, the same watch, standing among people dressed in black at what appeared to be a funeral. When he zoomed in closer, he could see tears on his own face. The photo showed him mourning at a burial, and when he examined the headstone in the foreground, the date of death was 2018, the same year he took the photograph. Michael had been working on a project called Sask Yas Quote Hambo O, documenting historic cemeteries across Northern California. On October 9th, 2018, he visited Colma's Cypress Lawn Cemetery, known as the City of the Dead because it houses more deceased than the living population of San Francisco. It was a foggy Tuesday morning, and he was alone, or so he thought, photographing ornate Victorian-era tombstones and weathered monuments. He took hundreds of shots that day, capturing the eerie beauty of the sprawling necropolis shrouded in mist. Nothing seemed unusual. He packed up his equipment around 3 p.m. and drove home, completely unaware that he'd just photographed something impossible. That evening, Michael uploaded the day's work to his computer and began the tedious process of reviewing and editing. He was about 2 hours in when he opened image number 247. The photo showed a funeral in progress, taken from about 50 feet away. A small group of mourners, maybe 15 or 20 people, stood around a fresh grave. He didn't remember seeing any funeral that day, which was strange, but sometimes services happened in distant sections of the cemetery. What caught his attention was how clear the faces were despite the distance, and that's when he saw it. Standing in the back row, partially obscured by an older woman in a black coat, was himself. Imagine that moment. You're looking through photos you took just hours earlier, and suddenly you're staring at your own face in a picture you don't remember taking. Michael's first thought was that it had to be a glitch, some kind of digital artifact or reflection. But when he zoomed in, the details were unmistakable. The same dark blue jacket he'd been wearing that day, the same silver watch his father had given him, the same scar on his left cheek from a childhood accident, the same everything. But the expression on his face was what really disturbed him. He looked devastated, crying, his eyes red and swollen like he'd been weeping for hours. Absolutely insane. Now, here's where it gets even stranger. Michael examined the headstone in the foreground of the photo, the one the mourners were gathered around. Using his professional editing software, he enhanced the image until he could read the inscription. The name was partially visible. Quote 3, the date of death, read, quote 4. That was the exact day he'd taken the photograph. His hands started shaking so badly he had to step away from the computer. The next day, Michael returned to Cypress Lawn Cemetery with the photo printed in his hand. He searched for over 3 hours, walking every path, checking every section he'd photographed. He wanted to find that exact spot, that specific grave. But here's the thing that made his skin crawl. He couldn't find it. Not a single grave matched the location in his photo. The tombstone, the surrounding monuments, the angle of the trees in the background, none of it existed anywhere in the cemetery. He even checked the cemetery's records for any burials on October 9th. There were none. 0 funerals that day. The cemetery had been completely closed to services because of maintenance work. Michael consulted with photography experts, showed them the raw image file, had them analyze it for signs of manipulation or digital forgery. Every single expert confirmed the same thing. The image was completely authentic, with no evidence of tampering, no layers, no Photoshop alterations. The metadata confirmed it was taken on his camera on October 9th at 2:47 p.m. One specialist told him that in 20 years of forensic photography analysis, he'd never seen anything like it. The image was real, but the scene it captured shouldn't exist. Some skeptics suggested it was an elaborate prank, that someone who looked exactly like Michael had staged the photo somehow. Others proposed it was a case of pareidolia, where the brain sees familiar patterns in random images. But those theories don't explain how Michael's exact clothing, his exact watch, his exact facial features could appear in a photo. He took himself at a cemetery where no funeral was happening. The more rational explanations just don't hold up under scrutiny. So what did Michael Chen actually photograph that foggy October morning? Did he somehow capture an image from a parallel universe where he was attending a funeral? Was it his own funeral in an alternate reality where he died on that exact date? Or did he glimpse a future or past version of himself, mourning someone yet to be identified? Think about this. What if our cameras can sometimes see beyond our dimension, capturing moments from realities that exist alongside our own? A thought that is as terrifying as it is fascinating. And here's the really creepy part. Michael still has that photo, and to this day, absolutely no one can explain how it's possible. Extremely creepy when you really think about it. For 15 years, from the age of 8 until she was 23, Emma Rodriguez had the exact same dream every single night. She dreamed of a small coastal town she'd never visited. A house with blue shutters overlooking the sea, a golden retriever named Max, and a man with kind eyes who called her my love. The dream was so consistent, so detailed, that she knew every crack in the sidewalk, every photo on the walls, every book on the shelves. Then, in 2019, while scrolling through social media, Emma saw a photograph that stopped her heart. It was her dream house, exact in every detail, posted by a woman who looked exactly like her, living in a town in Norway Emma had never heard of, with a golden retriever and a husband who matched the man from her dreams perfectly. Emma grew up in Phoenix, Arizona, about as far from the ocean as you can get in the United States. She'd never traveled abroad, never been to Scandinavia, and had no Norwegian heritage whatsoever. But every single night from 2004 to 2019, the moment she closed her eyes, she was there. In that house, living that life. The dream never varied. She would wake up in a bedroom with white linen curtains billowing in the sea breeze, walk down a wooden staircase with a slightly loose third step that creaked, and make coffee in a kitchen with blue tiles and copper pots hanging above the stove. Max would be waiting by the back door, tail wagging, ready for their morning walk along the rocky beach. As Emma got older, the dreams became more detailed, more real. She could taste the coffee, feel the cold Norwegian air on her skin, hear the specific sound of waves crashing against the cliffs below the house. She knew the name of the town, a tiny fishing village in the Lofoten Islands. She knew her neighbors, the old woman named Ingrid who lived next door, the fisherman who always waved from his red boat. And she knew him, the man she loved in the dream world. His name was Eric Halvorsen. He had sandy blonde hair, a scar above his right eyebrow, and a laugh that made her feel completely at home. She knew things about him that felt like genuine memories. How he took his tea, his favorite book, the story of how they'd met at a midsummer festival. By the time Emma was in college, she'd started keeping detailed journals about the dreams, sketching the house, mapping out the town, writing down conversations she'd had with Eric, Her roommates thought it was creative writing. Her therapist suggested it might be a coping mechanism for childhood stress, but Emma knew it was something else. It felt too real, too specific, too consistent to be just her imagination. These weren't random dreams, they were memories of a life she wasn't living. Now, here's where it gets absolutely insane. On June 7th, 2019, Emma was mindlessly scrolling through Instagram during her lunch break when an algorithm suggested a travel photography account. The first image that appeared was a photograph of a house with blue shutters overlooking a rocky coastline. Emma's phone slipped from her hands and clattered onto the table. That was her house. The exact house from 15 years of dreams. Same blue shutters, same wooden deck, same stone path leading to the door, even the same weathered bench under the window where she'd sat countless times in her dreams. Her hands shaking, Emma clicked on the profile. The account belonged to a woman named Emma Halverson. The profile photo made Emma's vision blur. The woman looked exactly like her. Same dark hair, same eyes, same smile, like looking into a mirror. Emma scrolled frantically through the photos. There was Max, the golden retriever, lying on a rug by a fireplace. There was the kitchen with blue tiles and copper pots. There was the view from the bedroom window, identical to what Emma saw every night. And there, in several photos, was Eric, the man from her dreams, real, alive, smiling at the camera with that same kind expression. Emma sent a message immediately, her fingers trembling so badly she had to retype it 3 times. She explained as carefully as she could about the dreams, about seeing the house, about the impossible familiarity of everything. She expected no response, or maybe a blocked account. Instead, 2 days later, Emma Halverson replied. And what she said sent chills down Emma's spine. She wrote, quote, 6 sleep researchers and psychologists who later examined the case were absolutely baffled. 2 women living on opposite sides of the world with no connection whatsoever, both experiencing detailed, consistent dreams about each other's lives for 15 years. The specificity was beyond coincidence. Emma in Phoenix dreamed of Emma in Norway with perfect accuracy, down to the names, the house layout, even the dog's name. And Emma in Norway dreamed of a lonely life in Arizona that matched the real Emma's actual existence. Some skeptics claimed it had to be an elaborate hoax, maybe for social media attention. But neither Emma ever monetized the story, never sought publicity, and both have consistently maintained their accounts are genuine. Others suggested it might be some form of quantum entanglement of consciousness, where 2 souls somehow became connected across space, each experiencing the other's reality during sleep. So, what's really happening between these 2 Emmas? Are they somehow the same soul living 2 different lives in parallel universes, and every night their consciousnesses switch places? Is this proof that our dreams aren't just random firing of neurons, but actual windows into alternate versions of ourselves? Think about this for a moment. What if every dream you've ever had wasn't your imagination at all, but memories from another you, living a completely different life in another dimension? A thought that is as beautiful as it is absolutely terrifying. And here's what really keeps you up at night. If it's true, which life is the dream? And which one is real? Pretty fascinating when you consider the implications. James Park, a meditation instructor from Seattle, achieved what he thought was a deep meditative state in 2020. But what happened next went far beyond anything he'd experienced in 20 years of practice. During an intensive meditation retreat, James claims his consciousness shifted completely into another version of himself. Not a vision, not a dream, but a full transfer of awareness. For 3 hours in our world, his body sat motionless while his mind inhabited another James Park, one who lived in a reality where he'd made different choices, married a different person, and worked as an architect instead of a meditation teacher. When he returned to his body, he carried memories so vivid and detailed that he could draw the floor plans of buildings he had designed in that other life. The retreat was held at a Buddhist meditation center in the Cascade Mountains from February 10th to February 17th, 2020. James had attended similar retreats dozens of times before. He was an experienced practitioner who'd been teaching mindfulness meditation for nearly 2 decades. The retreat followed a strict schedule: wake at 5 a.m., alternating periods of sitting and walking meditation throughout the day. Complete silence except for evening Dharma talks. Nothing unusual, nothing James hadn't done countless times before. But on the fifth day, during an afternoon sitting meditation session, something extraordinary happened. James was practicing a technique called open awareness, where you let your mind expand beyond the boundaries of your body and physical sensations. Around 2:30 p.m., he felt what he described as a tearing sensation, like his consciousness was being pulled away from his physical form. He'd experienced altered states before, moments of deep peace or expanded awareness, but this was completely different. This felt like he was actually leaving his body behind. Imagine sitting in meditation and suddenly you're not you anymore. You're someone else, living a completely different life, but with all your memories intact. That's exactly what James described. In an instant, he wasn't sitting in a meditation hall in Washington. He was standing in an architecture firm in Vancouver, Canada, wearing a suit he'd never owned, looking at blueprints for a residential tower he'd supposedly designed. He could feel the pen in his hand, smell the coffee on his desk, hear the conversations of colleagues he'd never met. But here's what made it truly bizarre. He knew these people. He remembered their names, their personalities, years of working alongside them. This other James Park had made different choices at key moments in his life. Instead of pursuing Eastern philosophy and meditation after college, he'd gone to architecture school. Instead of moving to Seattle, he'd settled in Vancouver. Instead of remaining single and dedicating his life to teaching, he'd married a woman named Catherine Liu, an environmental lawyer. James could remember their wedding day, their honeymoon in Japan, arguments they'd had, moments of joy. 10 years of marriage that had never happened in his actual life. Absolutely insane. Now, here's where it gets even stranger. While inhabiting this alternate version of himself, James had full access to technical knowledge he'd never learned. He understood architectural principles, building codes, structural engineering concepts. He reviewed a project he was working on, a sustainable housing complex, and understood every detail. He attended a meeting with clients, spoke confidently about load-bearing walls and thermal efficiency, used vocabulary he'd never studied. For 3 full hours, he lived as architect James Park, completely convinced that this was his real life, and his meditation teacher existence was somehow the dream. Then, just as suddenly as it began, he snapped back. He was sitting in the meditation hall, his legs numb from not moving for over 3 hours. Other meditators were quietly standing, beginning their walking meditation. The retreat teacher later confirmed that James had sat completely still for the entire afternoon session, 180 minutes without any movement whatsoever, which was unusual even for experienced practitioners. His vital signs had been normal, his breathing steady, but he'd been utterly motionless, as if his consciousness had truly been somewhere else. What happened when James returned was equally astounding. He immediately asked for paper and pencils and spent the next 6 hours frantically sketching and writing. He drew detailed architectural plans for buildings he'd never seen, floor plans with measurements, elevation drawings with structural notes. He wrote down names of colleagues, addresses of projects, technical specifications for materials. A week later, still shaken, James consulted with an architect friend who examined his drawings. The verdict? They were professionally rendered, technically sound designs that would actually work as real buildings. James had somehow acquired knowledge he'd never formally studied. Some skeptics suggested James had secretly studied architecture or absorbed the information subconsciously over years. But James's educational background was thoroughly documented: philosophy and religious studies, no architecture courses whatsoever. Others proposed it was an elaborate fantasy constructed by his subconscious mind during a particularly deep meditative state. But that theory doesn't explain the technical accuracy of his architectural drawings or how he knew specific Canadian building codes he'd never encountered. Neuroscientists who examined James's case suggested that perhaps in deep meditation, the brain can access information stored in ways we don't yet understand or even tap into a collective consciousness. But James insists it wasn't information he accessed, it was a life he lived. He didn't just download knowledge, he experienced years of memories, emotions, relationships, all in the span of 3 hours. So, What really happened to James Park in that meditation hall? Did his consciousness truly slip through some invisible barrier into a parallel universe where he'd made different choices? Are there techniques, perhaps hidden in ancient meditation practices, that allow us to visit alternate versions of ourselves? Think about this. What if the boundary between universes isn't a physical barrier, but a mental one? And what if, with the right state of consciousness, we could cross it? A thought that is as fascinating as it is mind-bending. And here's the really unsettling part. James says he can still remember Catherine's face, can still feel the love he had for her in that other life. A woman he never met in this reality, but married in another. Pretty insane when you really think about the implications. In 2014, a 4-year-old boy named Lucas Brennan from Ireland began telling his parents about his other mommy and daddy and his first house with such specific detail that his parents initially thought he was confusing movies with reality. But Lucas described things no 4-year-old should know, locations he'd never visited, people he'd never met, and most disturbingly, a car accident that he said had ended everything. His parents were skeptical until Lucas led them to a town 3 hours away that he'd never been to and pointed out a house, a park, and a school, describing each location with perfect accuracy. Local records revealed that a child matching Lucas's description of himself had died in a car accident at that exact intersection 2 years before Lucas was born. Colin and Maeve Brennan lived in a small village outside Dublin with their only son, Lucas. He was a bright, imaginative child, the kind who loved dinosaurs and building blocks, completely normal in every way. But around his 4th birthday in March of 2014, Lucas started saying things that made his parents deeply uncomfortable. It began innocently enough. "That's not how mommy makes pancakes," he said one morning. "My other mommy makes them different." Maeve laughed it off, thinking he meant a friend's mother or a character from a show. But Lucas insisted. The statements became more frequent and more specific. Lucas described a house with red bricks and a green door, a bedroom with dinosaur wallpaper, a backyard with a tire swing hanging from an oak tree. He talked about a dog named Biscuit, a grandmother who made apple tarts, a best friend named Callum who lived next door. His parents assumed he had an elaborate imaginary world, the kind many young children create. But then Lucas said something that made their blood run cold. He said quietly one evening, "Imagine your 4-year-old child telling you calmly about dying in a car accident." Colin and Maeve didn't know what to think. They consulted a child psychologist who suggested Lucas might have seen something traumatic on television or overheard adult conversations about accidents. But Lucas's descriptions were too detailed, too consistent. He drew pictures of the accident, always the same intersection, always a blue car and a red truck. He could describe the moment of impact, the sound of breaking glass, his mother screaming his name. Now, here's where it gets absolutely insane. In May of 2014, frustrated and frightened, Maeve decided to test Lucas. She asked him where this first house was located. Lucas thought for a moment, then said, "Ennis. The house is in Ennis." Ennis is a town in County Clare, nearly 3 hours from where the Brennans lived. Lucas had never been there. The family had no connections to that area whatsoever. But Lucas was adamant. "I can show you," he said. "I remember how to get there." Against their better judgment, Colin and Maeve drove Lucas to Ennis on a Saturday morning. They didn't tell him where they were going, just that they were taking a trip. When they reached the town, Lucas sat up in his car seat, suddenly alert. Quote 21. He said, pointing to a street they were passing. His parents followed his directions, turn after turn, through a neighborhood they'd never seen. Finally, Lucas said, "Stop. That's it. That's my first house." He was pointing at a brick house with a green door, a tire swing visible in the backyard, exactly as he had described. Colin got out of the car, his hands shaking, and knocked on the door. An elderly woman answered. He awkwardly explained that his son seemed to recognize the house, asked if she'd lived there long. The woman said she'd moved in 3 years ago, in 2011, after the previous family had moved away following a tragedy. Her expression darkened. Quote 23. She said quietly. Quote 24. Colin felt like the ground was dropping beneath him. He asked when the accident happened. Quote, 25. She said. Quote, 26. Lucas was born in March 2011, 5 months after this child's death. The woman invited them in, showed them old photos the previous owners had left behind. One photo showed a young boy, maybe 5 years old, with light brown hair and green eyes. Lucas stared at the photo and said simply, "That's me," from before. The Brennans obtained access to local newspaper archives. They found the accident report from October 20th, 2010. A 5-year-old boy named Liam Murphy had been killed when a truck ran a red light and collided with his mother's car at the intersection of Mill Road and Abbey Street in Ennis. The boy had died instantly. His mother survived. The description in the article matched everything Lucas had told them: blue car, red truck, the exact intersection Lucas had drawn dozens of times. But here's the detail that made this case impossible to dismiss. Lucas knew things only Liam could have known. When the Brennans managed to contact Liam's mother, Sarah Murphy, through a grief support group, they arranged a careful meeting. Sarah was skeptical and heartbroken, reluctant to engage with what seemed like a cruel hoax. But when she met Lucas, she went pale. Lucas looked at her and said, quote, 28, quote, Sarah started crying. That was a private lullaby she'd made up, never recorded, never shared, just something between her and her son. Researchers who study reincarnation cases examined Lucas's story and found it consistent with hundreds of similar reports worldwide. Children remembering past lives with verifiable details. But Lucas's case had a unique element. He didn't just remember dying, he remembered the transition. He described a sensation of floating, of seeing his mother crying over his body, and then a bright light that pulled him somewhere else. Quote, 29. He told investigators. Quote, 30. Some skeptics argue Lucas somehow learned about Liam Murphy through overheard conversations or internet research, but his parents maintain he had no access to such information. Others suggest cryptomnesia, where forgotten memories surface as if they're new experiences. But how would a child in Dublin have memories of a house and accident in Ennis that he'd never encountered? So, what really happened to Lucas Brennan? Is he actually Liam Murphy's soul, reborn in a parallel universe where Liam died and Lucas lived? Did his consciousness somehow transfer between dimensions, carrying memories of death from one reality into birth in another? Think about this for a moment. What if when we die in one universe, our soul simply shifts to another, continuing in a different version of reality? And what if some people, especially children, remember the crossing? A thought that is as comforting as it is absolutely terrifying. Because if Lucas really is Liam, living again in a different world, then maybe death isn't the end at all. Maybe it's just a doorway to another life, in another universe, where everything continues. Extremely fascinating when you consider what that means for all of us. Rebecca Torres, a self-taught artist from New Mexico, has never been able to explain where her paintings come from. Since 2017, she's created over 200 detailed artworks depicting places she's never been, people she's never met, and events she's never witnessed. But here's what makes her case truly extraordinary. 7 of her paintings have been recognized by complete strangers who've contacted her, claiming the scenes are from their own lives, their own homes, their own memories. One woman broke down crying when she saw a painting of a kitchen, saying it was identical to her grandmother's house in Poland, down to the exact placement of a crack in the wall. Rebecca had never been to Poland and had no knowledge of this woman or her grandmother. Rebecca worked as a bookkeeper in Albuquerque, living a quiet, unremarkable life until the night of April 3rd, 2017. She woke up at 3 a.m. with an overwhelming compulsion to paint. Despite having never seriously painted before, she'd taken a few art classes in high school, nothing more. But that night, she felt driven, almost possessed. She went to a 24-hour store, bought canvases, oils, brushes, and spent the next 12 hours creating her first painting. When she stepped back and looked at what she'd made, she had no idea where it had come from. It showed an old farmhouse at sunset, a tire swing hanging from a massive elm tree, a red barn in the distance, rendered in photorealistic detail. She'd never seen this place in her life. The compulsion didn't stop. Night after night, Rebecca painted. She couldn't control it. The images would appear in her mind, fully formed, demanding to be transferred to canvas. She painted bedrooms with floral wallpaper and antique furniture, city streets and places she'd never visited, gardens with specific flowers arranged in patterns she'd never designed, family dinners with faces she didn't recognize. Each painting was incredibly detailed, showing not just locations but moments, as if she were remembering actual events. The crack in a ceiling, the way light fell through a particular window, the exact pattern of wear on a wooden floor, all rendered with impossible accuracy. In November 2017, Rebecca posted photos of her artwork on social media, mainly to document what felt like a bizarre creative explosion she couldn't understand. That's when things got absolutely insane. Within days, she received a message from a woman named Katarzyna Nowak, living in Chicago. Katarzyna had seen one of Rebecca's paintings, the one of the kitchen, and was convinced it showed her grandmother's house in Krakow, Poland. She sent photos. The resemblance wasn't just similar, it was exact. The same green cabinets, the same ceramic tiles with blue flowers, the same wooden table with carved legs, even the same crack running diagonally across the wall behind the stove. Rebecca zoomed in on her painting and compared it to Katarzyna's photos. They were identical, down to the smallest details. Now, here's where it gets even stranger. Rebecca had painted specific objects in that kitchen. A copper kettle on the stove, a calendar on the wall showing May 1958, a pair of reading glasses on the table. Katarzyna confirmed every single item. Her grandmother had owned that exact copper kettle, used those exact glasses, and yes, there was a photograph of the kitchen from May 1958 showing that calendar on the wall. Rebecca had somehow painted a scene from 70 years ago in a house she'd never known existed, in a country she'd never visited. Absolutely baffling. But Katarzyna's recognition was just the beginning. Over the next 2 years, 6 more people contacted Rebecca with similar claims. A man from Seattle recognized a painting of a treehouse he'd built with his father in 1973. A woman from South Africa identified her childhood bedroom in Cape Town, accurate down to the posters on the wall and the view from the window. An elderly man in Japan broke down when he saw a painting of a garden that matched his family's ancestral home, destroyed in World War II, a place Rebecca couldn't possibly know about. Each person provided photographic evidence, and each time, Rebecca's paintings matched with uncanny precision. Think about this for a moment. How does someone paint memories they've never experienced? Rebecca underwent extensive testing. Neurologists found no abnormalities. Psychologists found no evidence of dissociative disorders or false memory syndrome. Art experts confirmed she had no formal training that could explain the technical skill and historical accuracy of her work. One researcher suggested she might have cryptomnesia, unconsciously recalling images from photos or films she'd seen. But Rebecca's paintings showed private spaces, family homes, intimate moments that were never photographed or published anywhere. She was painting people's actual memories. Rebecca describes the painting process as feeling like she's downloading someone else's experiences. She'll suddenly feel strong emotions, happiness, nostalgia, sometimes grief, attached to places she's never been. She'll smell things that aren't there, fresh bread baking, rain on pavement, her grandmother's perfume, except it's not her grandmother. When she paints a kitchen, she somehow knows it smells like coffee and cinnamon. When she paints a garden, she can feel the sun on her skin and hear bees buzzing, sensory details that shouldn't be accessible to her. Some researchers have proposed an extraordinary theory. Rebecca might be accessing what some call the collective unconscious, a theoretical shared memory bank containing human experiences across time and space. Others suggest something even more fascinating. What if Rebecca's consciousness can slip between parallel universes, observing moments from alternate versions of reality? What if every painting isn't imagination, but a window into real memories from souls living in other dimensions? The most disturbing detail came in 2020, when Rebecca painted a scene she couldn't shake from her mind. A car accident on a rainy highway, painted from the perspective of someone in the passenger seat, seeing the oncoming headlights. She posted it with the caption, damned, quote, yeah, 33. 3 days later, a woman from Oregon contacted her, sobbing. The painting showed the last moments before her sister's death in a car crash in 2015. The perspective, the rain, the approaching truck, all matched her sister's final seconds. Rebecca had somehow painted a dead woman's last memory. So, what's really happening to Rebecca Torres? Is she channeling memories from souls in parallel universes, painting glimpses of lives being lived simultaneously in other dimensions? Or has she tapped into something even stranger, a universal memory where every experience, every moment, every life is somehow recorded and accessible? Think about this. What if all our memories, from all possible lives we could have lived, exist somewhere, waiting to be accessed by someone sensitive enough to receive them? A thought that is as beautiful as it is deeply unsettling. Because if Rebecca can paint your memories from a universe where you made different choices, what does that say about the nature of reality itself? Pretty insane when you really think about it, and here's what keeps her up at night. She doesn't choose which memories come to her, they just arrive, uninvited. Demanding to be painted, extremely creepy. The antique mirror that appeared in an estate sale in Charleston, South Carolina in 2015 seemed ordinary enough when Margaret Sullivan purchased it for her bedroom. But within days of hanging it, Margaret began noticing something impossible. Sometimes just for a split second, her reflection would show her in different clothes, in a different room, living a different life. At first, she thought her eyes were playing tricks. But then she started taking photos. In dozens of photographs, the mirror's reflection didn't match reality. It showed Margaret in business suits when she was wearing pajamas, showed a modern apartment when she lived in a historic home, showed her with longer hair, different jewelry, an entirely different life happening simultaneously with her own. Margaret was a freelance graphic designer who lived alone in a historic Charleston row house built in 1842. She'd been browsing an estate sale on King Street on September 12, 2015, when she spotted the mirror leaning against a wall in the back room. It was beautiful, an ornate Victorian piece from the late 1800s with an elaborately carved wooden frame featuring roses and vines. The estate agent told her it had belonged to the previous homeowner, an elderly woman named Eleanor Prescott, who died 3 months earlier at age 94. The mirror had been in Eleanor's family for generations. Margaret paid $250 and hung it in her bedroom that same afternoon. The first incident happened 3 days later. Margaret was getting ready for bed, wearing an old t-shirt and sweatpants, when she glanced at the mirror and froze. For just a second, maybe two, her reflection showed her wearing a tailored black blazer and white blouse, standing in what looked like a sleek modern office with floor-to-ceiling windows. The background wasn't her bedroom, with its exposed brick and antique furniture. It was glass and steel and city lights. She blinked and the image snapped back to normal, just her, in her pajamas, in her bedroom. She chalked it up to tiredness, maybe a trick of the light. But it kept happening, sometimes in the morning while brushing her teeth, sometimes late at night, always just brief flashes. The reflection would shift, showing her in clothes she didn't own, in places she'd never been. What made it especially unsettling was that the reflected Margaret was doing things, moving, living. She wasn't frozen like a photograph. The other Margaret would be typing on a laptop, or talking to someone off screen, or sipping coffee, all while the real Margaret stood motionless, staring in shock. Now here's where it gets absolutely insane. Margaret started documenting the phenomenon with her phone camera. On October 7, 2015, she set up her phone to take continuous photos while she stood in front of the mirror. Out of 123 photos taken over 15 minutes, 17 showed something impossible. In those 17 images, while Margaret stood in her bedroom wearing jeans and a sweater, the mirror's reflection showed her in professional attire, in what appeared to be a corporate office environment. Same face, same woman, but different hair length, different clothes, different setting. Absolutely different life. Imagine looking at yourself in a mirror and seeing another version of you living in a completely different reality. Margaret became obsessed. She took thousands of photos over the following months, and the pattern became clear. The mirror was showing her an alternate life, one where she apparently worked in a high-rise office building, wore expensive business clothes, and lived in a modern apartment. She could see details in the background, contemporary furniture, a city skyline she didn't recognize, even glimpses of other people walking past in the reflection, colleagues perhaps, in this other world. But then something happened that sent absolute chills down Margaret's spine. In one photograph taken on November 19th, 2015, the reflected Margaret was looking directly at the camera, at her real self, with an expression of shock and recognition. It was as if the other Margaret could see her too, both versions, standing on opposite sides of whatever barrier separated their realities, staring at each other through the mirror. For that one frozen moment captured in the photograph, both Margarets were aware of each other's existence. Margaret contacted physicists, paranormal investigators, anyone who might explain what was happening. She allowed her mirror to be examined by experts from 3 different universities. They found nothing unusual about the glass or frame, no hidden screens, no technological trickery, no evidence of tampering. It was just an old mirror, yet the photographs didn't lie. Digital forensics experts confirmed the images were authentic, unmanipulated, showing genuinely impossible reflections. One quantum physicist proposed a fascinating theory. What if the mirror, due to its age or composition or some property we don't understand, acts as a window between parallel universes? In quantum mechanics, there's a concept that every choice creates a branching universe. Maybe in one branch, Margaret became a corporate executive instead of a freelance designer. Maybe that Margaret lives in New York or Chicago instead of Charleston. And maybe, somehow, this specific mirror can show the boundary between these realities, revealing glimpses of the life Margaret could have lived if she'd made different choices. Others suggested the mirror might have absorbed memories or energy from its previous owner, Eleanor Prescott, and was somehow projecting them. But Margaret researched Eleanor's life thoroughly. Eleanor had been a schoolteacher, never a businesswoman, never lived in a modern high-rise. The life shown in the mirror's reflection didn't match Eleanor's past at all. Now, here's the detail that made Margaret finally remove the mirror from her house. In March of 2016, she woke up at 3 a.m. feeling compelled to look in the mirror. What she saw terrified her. The reflected Margaret wasn't in an office. She was in a hospital bed, looking pale and weak, with IV lines attached to her arms. The other Margaret's eyes were closed, and machines surrounded the bed. Margaret watched for nearly 5 minutes, paralyzed with fear, as the reflected version of herself lay dying in some alternate reality. She couldn't look away. Was this a glimpse of a possible future? Or was it happening right now to another version of her soul in a parallel dimension? Margaret covered the mirror with a sheet that night and sold it the next day to an antique dealer, refusing to explain why. She has no idea where the mirror is now, or if it's still showing impossible reflections to whoever owns it. The photographs remain unexplainable evidence that, for 6 months, Margaret Sullivan somehow saw into another universe. So, what was that mirror really showing? Was it a genuine window into a parallel reality where Margaret's soul lives a completely different life? Are there objects in our world that can breach the boundaries between dimensions, allowing us to see the infinite other versions of ourselves? Think about this for a moment. What if you looked in a mirror right now and saw yourself living a completely different life, making different choices, being someone entirely different? Would you want to know what could have been? Or would it drive you mad seeing all the lives you could be living? A thought that is as fascinating as it is absolutely terrifying. And here's what really kept Margaret up at night. If she could see the other Margaret dying in a hospital bed, does that mean somewhere in another universe, that version of her could see this Margaret too? Pretty creepy when you think about it. Extremely creepy. Daniel Morrison's case, documented by neurologists at Johns Hopkins in 2021, represents one of the most thoroughly studied incidents of parallel consciousness ever recorded. After a severe car accident left him in a coma for 6 weeks, Daniel woke up claiming he'd been living a complete second life while unconscious. But this wasn't a dream or hallucination. Daniel provided verifiable information about events that occurred during his coma, described technological innovations that didn't exist yet, and most incredibly, when he drew a map of the city where his other self lived, it matched no location on Earth, but showed a logical, consistent urban layout that architects said was more advanced than current city planning. Daniel insisted both lives felt equally real, and for months after waking, he struggled to accept that one of them had to be false. Daniel was a 32-year-old high school mathematics teacher from Baltimore when his life changed forever on March 14th, 2021. He was driving home from a faculty meeting when a drunk driver ran a red light and T-boned his vehicle at 60 miles per hour. The impact was catastrophic. Daniel suffered severe head trauma, multiple fractures, and internal bleeding. Paramedics didn't think he'd survive the trip to the hospital, but he did survive, barely, and slipped into a deep coma that doctors warned might be permanent. His brain showed activity, but he was completely unresponsive. His family kept vigil, hoping for any sign of consciousness. For 42 days, Daniel Morrison existed somewhere between life and death. Then, on April 25th, he opened his eyes. His first words were, "I need to call my wife." The doctors were relieved. His actual wife, Jennifer, rushed to his side, crying with joy. But Daniel looked at her with confusion and said, "No, not you. I mean Claire, my wife Claire. I need to tell her I'm okay." Jennifer and the medical staff exchanged worried glances. Daniel didn't know anyone named Claire. He'd been married to Jennifer for 8 years. There was no Claire in his life. But Daniel insisted, growing increasingly agitated. "I've been with her for 6 weeks," he said. "We have a daughter, Sophia. She's 3 years old. I need to get back to them." Imagine waking up from a coma, convinced you've been living an entire different life, a life so real that your actual existence feels like the dream. That's exactly what happened to Daniel. As he recovered physically over the following days, he described in extraordinary detail the life he claimed to have lived while in the coma. He said his name was still Daniel Morrison, but in that other life, he was a software engineer living in a city called Nexara. He worked for a company developing quantum computing applications. He lived in a high-rise apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a harbor. He was married to Claire Nakamura, a medical researcher, and they had a 3-year-old daughter named Sophia who loved dinosaurs and insisted on wearing her purple rain boots everywhere. The level of detail was absolutely staggering. Daniel could describe his daily commute, the layout of his office building, the names of his colleagues, the project he was working on involving quantum encryption algorithms. He described family dinners, conversations with his daughter, arguments with his wife about moving to a bigger apartment. He could recall what he'd eaten for breakfast on what he believed was the morning before he quote 39 here. Scrambled eggs, toast with strawberry jam, and coffee with oat milk. He remembered reading Sophia a bedtime story the night before, a book about a dragon who was afraid of flying. Now, here's where it gets absolutely insane. Neurologists at Johns Hopkins, led by Dr. Patricia Chen, decided to document everything Daniel claimed about his alternate life. They asked him to draw maps, write down names, describe technologies he claimed to have worked with. What they discovered sent chills through the research team. First, Daniel accurately described several major world events that had occurred during his 6-week coma, events he couldn't possibly have known about while unconscious: a political crisis in Eastern Europe, a major tech company merger, specific weather patterns, all accurate. But he described experiencing these events from the perspective of his other life in Nexara, reading about them in news feeds on devices that don't exist yet. Then came the city map. Daniel spent hours drawing a detailed map of Nexara, showing streets, districts, transit systems, parks, landmarks. Urban planning experts from MIT examined the map and were stunned. The city design was extraordinarily sophisticated, incorporating traffic flow patterns, public transportation integration, and environmental sustainability, features more advanced than any current city planning. The layout was logical, efficient, and functional in ways that suggested it was a real place, not something a coma patient could fabricate. One architect said it would take a team of experts months to design something this coherent. But Nexara doesn't exist, not on Earth. Researchers checked every database, every map, every city planning archive worldwide. There's no city called Nexara anywhere. Yet Daniel could describe it in such minute detail that he drew the floor plan of his apartment from memory, showing where the furniture was placed, which drawer in the kitchen stuck, how the morning light came through the bedroom window. He described the view from his office on the 47th floor, the coffee shop on the corner where he bought lunch, the park where he took Sophia on weekends. The quantum encryption algorithms Daniel described? Computer scientists found them theoretically sound, representing genuine innovations in the field. Daniel was a high school math teacher with no background in quantum computing, yet he could explain complex concepts he claimed to have been working on in his other life. Some of his ideas were so advanced that researchers asked if they could study his notes further. For months after waking, Daniel experienced what doctors called reality confusion. He would forget which life he was living in, call Jennifer by the wrong name, wake up disoriented thinking he needed to drop Sophia off at daycare. He grieved for Claire and Sophia as if they were real people he'd lost. He showed symptoms of genuine trauma, the kind you'd expect from someone whose family had disappeared. Psychological evaluations revealed he wasn't psychotic, wasn't experiencing delusions in the traditional sense. His brain scans showed unusual activity in areas associated with memory formation, but nothing that explained how he could have such detailed, consistent false memories. Think about this for a moment. What if Daniel's consciousness really did slip into a parallel universe while his body lay in a coma? What if there's a world where Nixara exists, where Daniel is a software engineer married to Claire with a daughter named Sophia? And what if for 6 weeks his soul lived there, fully inhabiting that version of himself, while his body here remained unconscious? The alternative is equally disturbing. His brain created an entire reality, complete with consistent geography, plausible technology, and emotional depth, all while damaged and comatose. So, what really happened to Daniel Morrison during those 42 days? Did his consciousness truly transfer to a parallel version of himself, living in another dimension? Are comas sometimes doorways between realities, allowing our souls to slip between universes? Or can the human brain, even when severely injured, construct entire worlds so convincing that waking up feels like losing everything? A thought that is as fascinating as it is deeply unsettling. And here's what haunts Daniel most. He still dreams about them every night. Claire and Sophia feel more real to him than memories of his actual childhood. He says it's like mourning people who never existed, except they did exist, just not here. Not in this universe. Pretty insane when you really think about the implications. Because if Daniel really did live in 2 universes simultaneously, maybe all of us are doing the same thing right now, and we just don't remember the other lives when we wake up. Extremely fascinating and absolutely terrifying. In 2022, a private research facility in Switzerland conducted an experiment that was never meant to be made public. But leaked documents have revealed something that could change everything we think we know about consciousness and reality. Using a modified quantum computer and controversial brainwave technology, researchers attempted to detect consciousness across parallel quantum states. What they found was unprecedented. 3 test subjects, under deep brain scanning, showed simultaneous neural activity patterns that suggested their consciousness was literally existing in 2 places at once. The patterns were too complex, too consistent to be random. One subject, a woman identified only as, quote, 41, quote, began speaking in 2 voices simultaneously, describing 2 completely different rooms, 2 different lives, as if her soul was genuinely split between universes. The experiment was immediately shut down. The facility closed, and all personnel signed non-disclosure agreements. But the question remains, did they prove that our souls are living infinite lives across infinite realities? The facility was called the Bergman Institute for Quantum Consciousness, located in a remote valley outside Zurich. It was funded by private investors whose names have never been disclosed, though leaked documents suggest connections to major tech companies and governments interested in consciousness research. The lead scientist was Dr. Helena Voss, a quantum physicist who'd published controversial papers, suggesting that consciousness might exist as a quantum phenomenon, meaning it could theoretically exist in multiple states simultaneously, just like quantum particles. Her theory was that if consciousness operates on quantum principles, then every version of you across parallel universes might share a single, connected awareness, a soul that exists everywhere at once. The experiment began on August 9th, 2022. 7 volunteers, all screened for psychological stability and given thorough medical evaluations, were connected to an array of equipment that sounds like something from a science fiction movie. Advanced EEG sensors monitored their brain activity at unprecedented resolution. A modified quantum computer, cooled to near absolute zero, ran algorithms designed to detect quantum coherence in neural patterns. The subjects were placed in sensory deprivation chambers to minimize external input, allowing researchers to focus purely on internal consciousness activity. The goal was simple yet profound. Could they detect signs of consciousness existing in parallel quantum states? For the first 3 subjects, the results were interesting but inconclusive. They showed unusual brain activity patterns, moments where neural firing seemed to follow quantum probability distributions rather than classical patterns, but nothing definitive. Then came Subject 7, a 34-year-old woman whose identity remains classified. What happened to her changed everything. Imagine lying in complete darkness, sensors covering your head, while scientists try to detect if your soul exists in multiple universes. That's what Subject 7 experienced. 47 minutes into the experiment, her brain activity suddenly spiked in ways that made absolutely no sense. 2 distinct patterns of neural activity appeared simultaneously. Patterns that should be impossible in a single brain. It was as if 2 different consciousnesses were operating at the same time in one person. The quantum computer began registering what Dr. Voss later described as, quote, 42, quote, essentially detecting that Subject 7's awareness was somehow split between 2 realities. Now, here's where it gets absolutely insane. Subject 7 began speaking, but she wasn't speaking normally. 2 voices came from her mouth at the same time, overlapping but distinct, describing 2 completely different environments. One voice said, "I'm in a white room with medical equipment. I can hear beeping." The other voice, speaking simultaneously, said, "I'm in my kitchen. The coffee maker is on. I can smell it." The research team froze, watching in stunned silence as this continued for nearly 3 minutes. The voices described different sensory experiences, different emotional states, different realities, all coming from the same person at the same time. Dr. Voss's assistant, whose testimony appears in the leaked documents, reported that Subject 7's vital signs showed 2 overlapping patterns. Her heart rate appeared to be 2 different rates at once, as if the monitoring equipment was detecting her physical body in 2 quantum states. Blood pressure readings fluctuated in ways that made medical sense only if you assumed 2 separate bodies were being measured simultaneously. The quantum computer's readings indicated that Subject 7's consciousness was achieving what physicists call macroscopic quantum coherence, something that should be impossible for anything larger than subatomic particles. Yet, here it was, detected in a living human brain. Then Subject 7 said something that made everyone's blood run cold. Still speaking in 2 voices, she said, quote, 46, quote. Her dual voices became distressed, panicked. She started describing other lives, other versions of herself. One who was a teacher in Boston, one who died in childhood, one who'd never been born at all. The quantum readings went haywire, showing patterns the computer couldn't process. As if it was detecting not just 2 states, but potentially infinite variations of the same consciousness. Dr. Voss made the decision to terminate the experiment immediately. They began the shutdown protocol, bringing Subject 7 out of the sensory deprivation state. But when she fully regained normal consciousness, she was different. She couldn't stop crying. She told researchers she had experienced something impossible to describe, like being shattered across infinite mirrors, each reflection showing a different version of her life. She said she could still feel them, all the other versions of herself, like echoes in her mind. For weeks afterward, she reported moments where she'd suddenly remember things that never happened to her in this reality, memories bleeding through from alternate lives. The leaked documents include brain scans taken of Subject 7 in the days following the experiment. Neurologists who've examined them report anomalies they can't explain, areas of her brain showing activity patterns that suggest she retained some form of quantum coherence. As if the experiment permanently altered her consciousness. She reportedly still experiences moments where she perceives two realities at once, brief flashes where she simultaneously exists here and somewhere else. The Bergman Institute was shut down within 72 hours of the experiment. Official records state it closed due to, quote, 47, quote, but the leaked documents tell a different story. Government officials arrived, confiscated all research materials, and made every team member sign legally binding non-disclosure agreements with severe penalties for violation. Dr. Voss disappeared from public life entirely. Some say she's continuing her research in secret. Others claim she was warned never to publish her findings. The official scientific community dismisses the leaked documents as elaborate fiction, but the technical details are too sophisticated, too specific to be easily fabricated. Think about this for a moment. What if this experiment really did prove that consciousness exists across multiple quantum states? What if your soul isn't confined to just this one body, this one life, but is simultaneously living infinite variations across infinite universes? And what if Subject 7 didn't just detect those parallel lives, but briefly experienced them all at once? A thought that is as mind-blowing as it is absolutely terrifying. So, did the Bergman Institute really prove that parallel souls exist? Did they demonstrate that every choice we make creates a branching universe where another version of us lives out the alternative? Or did they simply push the human brain into a state where it created the illusion of parallel existence? The leaked documents raise more questions than they answer, and with the facility closed and the researchers silenced, we may never know the full truth. But here's what keeps scientists and philosophers awake at night. If the experiment was real, if Subject 7 truly experienced multiple lives simultaneously, then right now, as you're reading this, other versions of you might be living completely different lives in parallel universes. And somewhere, maybe in some quantum laboratory we'll never hear about, they might be proving it pretty insane when you really think about it. Absolutely and completely insane. Because if they're right, then none of us are living just one life. We're living all of them, everywhere, all at once. Extremely fascinating and deeply, deeply unsettling.